And we're recording. And I'm going to let Bill keep an eye on the waiting room. And welcome to the 2021 Maryland Teen Reconnect Conference. This session is Teen Mental Health Awareness with presenters Laura Ellis, School Library Media Specialist from the Montgomery County Public Schools. Welcome, Laura. Kate Jones, Public Services Associate from Charles County Public Library. And Britt Presley, Public Services Librarian, Calvert Library Mobile Services. So my name is Carrie Sanders, and I will be your Zoom host for today's session. We are in a Zoom meeting. Surprise, surprise. We probably all feel like we know it inside and out, but just in case, I'll go over a couple tips and tricks regarding Zoom. So in the bottom left-hand corner, if you are on a computer, a laptop is your option for mute and to stop video. Please mute yourself if you are not asking a question or talking. And as a host, I can mute you if there seems to be a little bit of background noise. And so don't stress too much if you're having trouble muting, we can handle that for you. Please feel free to stop your video too, if you would like, but we love to see your faces as we gather for these learning opportunities in Zoom. So if you can and use your camera, that would be great. If you're calling in via phone, you can use *6 to mute yourself. And please use the chat to ask questions, or you can raise your hand during today's Q&A portion. We'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion. We'll also keep an eye on the chat so we don't lose any questions along the way. And as our co-panelists take turns, they can kind of keep track, and if they see something that they can answer quickly, they'll do that. But we'll also make sure to kind of parking lot all of our questions and make sure we cover everything in our discussion time. In the top right-hand corner, if you're on a laptop, you can choose between speaker view and gallery view. And if you're having any tech issues, just let us know in the chat and we'll do our best to help troubleshoot for you. So while we're here and you're getting settled, please feel free to say hello to each other in the chat, and we will pop the sign-in sheet in there for you several times so that you can make sure to acknowledge that you're here. For this session today, we want to make sure that you do have your email in there and your name, because I will use that to send out follow-up information for you, which includes CE form, link to our evaluation that you can give us some feedback about today, and some other things. So really important to make sure that you sign in, and we'll make sure we get the sign-in link in there to you multiple times. Today will be part presentation with our co-panelists and part discussion, which means there'll be plenty of time for the questions and answers. Like I said, we'll kind of keep an eye so we don't lose anything along the way. So you can hang on to your questions, or you can pop them into the chat, and we will corral them and make sure that everything is answered before the end of our hour. And so now I'm going to move us into our ropes agreements. We've been using these for all of our sessions today, so you may have already seen this. ROPES is just an acronym for some of these key points that we try to keep in mind when we come together for any kind of learning and discussion. I've used these a lot. They've been shared with me from YALSA for some of my transforming teen services trainings, and these seem to kind of encapsulate what usually a group will create on their own if they create their own agreements, which is the best practice if we could do that. But for the sake of time, we're gonna rely on our ROPES agreement. So I will go through these real quickly. R stands for respecting yourself and others as we come to this space together. The O is to be open to new thinking, new ideas that you may hear, and also to know that you may think something, you may say something, and then later backtrack a little bit or change your mind or think that maybe you didn't mean quite that. And that's okay, because we are all kind of thinking new thoughts and reframing things as we go through our learning. So totally fine to change your mind. The P is to make sure that we participate. We are all here to learn from each other, but it's also important to know to pass so that everyone gets an opportunity to also ask questions and to share. The E is our Spanish lesson for today. E is for escuchar, which is listen in Spanish. So just a reminder to have real active listening and be really open to what you're hearing from others today. And also it's to be open to the experience of us all together. And then also the S is to be sensitive to each other and to know that this is a safe space. We think a lot about our safe space for our teens, and this is the safe space we're creating for ourselves as we learn from each other. So hopefully those all sound like something we can all work with in the next hour as we come together to hear and share. And I am now going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful panelists of Laura, Britt, and Kate. And I think we're going to get started, and Britt's going to open up for us today. So welcome. We're glad you're all here, everyone.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Britt Presley. I am coming to you all here from Calvert Library, Rural Library from the Mobile Services Division. So I do outreach work there. Previous to that, I worked at one of our libraries that's not on wheels, our Fairview branch, for just under 2 years. For me, teen mental health is a very important topic, both personally and professionally, because as a teenager, I suffered from poor mental health that was unfortunately completely unaddressed and completely untreated for more than a decade. I would not actually be officially diagnosed with the severe anxiety depression I was dealing with until I was in my mid-20s. And for me, finally getting that diagnosis was a huge turning point that allowed me to be able to do a lot of work that helped me get to this position today. It also was kind of a huge weight off my shoulders, because as a teen, when things don't feel right and you don't know why things don't feel right, you don't know how to ask for help. So part of that was just being able to look backwards now as an adult and go, oh, so that's what was happening. And I'm not alone in this, because the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, which I love, is a wonderful organization and you all should check out, has actually reported that the average delay between symptom onset and official diagnosis is a whopping 11 years. So the majority of people go a full decade not knowing why they're feeling the way they're feeling. So I am an average citizen in this specific regard. Actually, you'll find 2 NAMI handouts on the Teen Reconnect conference page that I really hope that you all look at once this presentation is through. One goes through exactly what I was saying, the statistics around diagnosis, both by age, by ethnic group, and that sort of thing. And the second one talks a little bit about what those common symptoms are that start to first become noticeable around an average of 14 years of age, and is not diagnosed then until people are in their 20s. And each one of these is only a 1-page handout. So if you have time, please look at it. It's incredibly eye-opening to put numbers to this thing that we all know about. And NAMI is, again, an incredible organization. They have been working in this field since 1979. They're fantastic. And they also have a mental health hotline. So I would definitely recommend you keep that just in your back pocket as a good resource. And now back to talking about me. Prior to joining the library, the other reason this is such an important topic for me is that I served a year with AmeriCorps, which, for those of you that may not be familiar with the organization, is commonly known as Domestic Peace Corps. So I didn't get to go anywhere exotic. I actually was working in Prince George's County, Maryland. But as part of my service, I worked as a mediator in Prince George's County Public Schools, doing things like attendance mediation when kids are not able to get to school for whatever reason. A lot of the times it has to do with physical and mental health in the family, whether it be the teen's own or a family member's. And another part of that service we did was also leading trainings for middle schoolers on the verge of entering high school so that they could get conflict resolution skills and also have a safe space to talk about these mental health issues. So that's my piece that I wanted to just add. And I believe Kate is next.
Hi, I'm Kate Jones. I'm from Charles County Public Library. I came to the library from the museum field. I'm a historian and tour guide, or I was previously. And I started focusing on mental illness and especially mental illness in the time of the coronavirus when a couple months ago I was finally diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. I've always been an anxious person. I've had depressive episodes, perfectionism problems. But none of them seemed like really a big problem until the pandemic. And I was essentially removed from everything I had known, all of my friends during the pandemic, and essentially just given a new life, which for someone like me who's not comfortable with change, that was really hard. And COVID has brought about a lot of changes, and there's so many that we haven't even seen yet. But what we do see is fear. We have this fear of others, fear for ourselves. We fear inanimate objects now, as if we live in like a Final Destination movie. We have this consuming presence of COVID. And these were a few news headlines I found this morning about that there were apparently 731 new cases in Maryland in 24 hours. 9% of Maryland adults still won't get coronavirus vaccine. But people are starting to return to this normal way of life. And we kind of act like COVID is cured, but it's not. It's still present. And in the midst of all of this, we have teenagers and students who are being sent back to school, and they're told, yeah, go sit 3 inches away from your classmate for 40 minutes. Teenagers never really had a sense of control before COVID, and now they really don't have a sense of control. And teenage years are strange. I know that from being a teenager. You're not a kid and you don't want to be treated as a kid, but you're not an adult either. And they've just been uprooted from everything they know. And, you have teens who, even before the pandemic, had poor home lives. I was in an abusive relationship when the pandemic began. And, you essentially just get locked in your house with these people. And I'm sure the coronavirus wasn't hard if you had a computer and a laptop and Disney Plus and lots of other entertainments. But for a lot of people, they don't have that. And they used the library as a safe haven. And all of a sudden that was gone. And even now with things opening back up, there's still limitations, and mental illness makes us feel like these limitations sometimes are our fault. I'm very passionate about theater, and up to the coronavirus, I had done 2 shows back to back. And then all of a sudden it was just gone and I didn't have it anymore. And I'm still not back into it yet. And I feel, oh, well, other people are doing this. This is my passion. Why do I not want to do it anymore? I don't know who I am, what happened. And that's unfortunately what a lot of people are going through. You have teens facing homelessness with jobs not reopening. You have teens who are still stuck with abusers, who don't have the technology to communicate with their friends anymore because they don't have iPhones and all these expensive technologies that we now need. And people are losing a sense of who they are. And that's very tough. And when I lost a sense of who I was, that was when I turned and wanted to commit suicide because I didn't know who I was anymore. And that's very, very hard to go through. And problems like mental illness don't go away. And no one wants them to go away more than the people who are suffering from them. We're not refusing to get help because we want to be an inconvenience to you. And sometimes people with mental illness, we're scared to wake up in the morning because we don't know how we're going to feel. And we were fine yesterday and we're not fine now. And because these illnesses are invisible, they're often treated like they don't exist. We see a person with crutches and we want to bend over backwards to help them. But when it comes to mental illness, it's your problem and you need to get better and go take a walk and think happy thoughts. And so what I was really thinking about preparing for this conference was, we don't know what's affected our patrons. We don't know what's affected our teens. And having that compassion, creating new spaces and new programs, maybe even for pandemic trauma, trying to bring in counselors because people can't get access to them anymore. There's just not enough slots. So next time we see a teenager having bad behavior, remember that we don't really know what's going on in their head, and we have to respond in a way that's different. There's more calmness and patience which is really kind of what the library represents. And I'm going to give a chance to go over to Laura and let her talk about her library safe space in schools.
Well, thank you so much, Kate and Britt. It was great hearing from both of you. And Kate, you set me up beautifully. So I'm going to share my screen so everyone can see, because I am in teacher mode. And hopefully the bell won't ring. So if you hear a bell ring, please don't leave. That's dismissal for the kids, but not for us, at least not yet. So as Kate was saying, our teens have been through a lot, and so have all of us. So what I would like to share is that my journey into this occurred due to COVID-19. I have lost 8 members of my family due to COVID in 2020, and 4 additional members due to gun violence in 2020 and 2021. So that was extremely traumatic for me. And of course, death of George Floyd, our continued political unrest, and the events of January 6, 2021. So if we're adults and we're professionals and we're struggling with some of these things, can we imagine how our kids are feeling? So first, how have these events and other events affected you personally? Have you taken inventory? Have you done the things that Kate and Brett are talking about, making sure you get the help you need? And secondly, if we're being impacted by this, have we taken any thought about how it has affected the young people we serve and their families? So that's a lot to think about. One of the things I did personally, I sought out trauma. I thought trauma was something when you fell and hit your head. So I went and got trauma treating. I went through a trauma healing group and later got more training in trauma. So what exactly is trauma? And as you can see on your screen, trauma is a reaction to an unexpected event or series of events that creates great stress to the point in which a person is overwhelmed. And a person could even be scared to death. And I'm like most of you, when we left in March of 2020, we thought we were going to be out maybe a week or 2 weeks. I even took paperwork home to do Teen Connect. And of course, that didn't happen. And there's different types of trauma. And my predecessors, my fellow co-hosts spoke of this, not directly, but they talked about how they're impacted about how they feel. So sometimes people suffer from secondhand trauma. And that is a perfect example of that is definitely the death of George Floyd, the events of January 6th, and other events that may have occurred in a person's life. There's also historical trauma where groups of people or a subgroup may have experienced generational trauma. So trauma is not necessarily one event. It could be multiple events and it can be compounded. And so when 2021 opened, I thought, oh, life is going to get better. That first weekend, I had a member of my family die of cancer, and a few days later, January 6th. So that was very traumatic. And so if these things keep happening, how do we recover from them? And what are the impacts of trauma? Trauma can make a person feel numb, angry, can become fearful, rage, helplessness, anxiety. A person could develop low self-esteem. And our young people, especially that we're dealing with, have very high rates of suicide. So suicide ideation is something that our young teenagers really face and that we have to be aware of. And of course, this is not an exhausted list. This is just some of the top reactions that people have due to trauma. And as Kate was sharing, and as Britt said, sometimes you're aware that you're suffering from something and sometimes you don't. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a mental health problem affecting people who have been affected by trauma. And people may not even know that they're suffering from it. I think Britt said the average length is 11 years. If you see that last line, it says these symptoms can develop days, months, or years after the trauma itself. So how does this how do we deal with this as we're dealing with our teens and our tweens? If kids are coming into our spaces and they're not behaving in a way that we're familiar, first of all, we have to realize they may have been traumatized, and however they behave, we do not take it personally. I'm a person who takes everything personally. So this is one I really hold on to, because people tend to be less sensitive right now. And as Kate eloquently said, we're still going through a pandemic. So we need to be very aware of that. And whatever happens, realize they're kids and even our other patrons, just to not take anything personally. A second coping habit that I've had to really work on is when people behave in a way that's unproductive to our spaces, to not take offense. It's very easy to become offended. And when I'm saying don't take offense, even if someone is verbally abusive, we can make the choice not to be offended by how they're behaving. In both instances, if a behavior or if speech is so offensive that it needs to be taken care of or spoken about, that's okay. We may not be able to do it in that moment because we may need to step away. So we never have to subject ourselves to abusive language or behavior, but we have to make sure we create avenues of communication so those issues can be discussed and resolutions can be possible for everyone. So I'm not saying take the abuse. I'm saying you don't have to take it personally. You don't have to take offense, and at the appropriate time, in the appropriate fashion, we should come together. Now, how can we come together? One strategy I have that's really worked well with our school here is reciprocal mentorship. As Kate said, we don't have enough counselors in our schools we have 2,400 and counting students here at Wheaton, and approximately 10 counselors, 3 of whom who are currently out. So the counselors cannot do the job by themselves, but if we learn the skills of how to help each other get through trauma, through active listening and other strategies, and we are there for each other, then we can break down some of those bridges and help each other through this very traumatic time. So that's why this one is like, why is this so important for us? Because we've all experienced some level of trauma, and our students and families, as I stated, may not realize they are facing trauma. And we need to understand, we need to take care of ourselves, make sure our staff is okay, so we can be the best for our students and our patrons. And finally, and I'll put these links in the chat and they will be on the teen website, I have so many resources, videos, things that can help you, because I needed a lot of help when I went through that's why I know trauma is so difficult, because I was so traumatized myself. And sometimes I'm re-traumatized, but then I put forth those methods and those strategies that help me, and I know they can help others. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for your honesty and acknowledging that we're thinking about our teens, but we're also thinking about ourselves, and we can't. It's kind of reminds me, and maybe I heard this in another session, not today, but somewhere. It's kind of like the analogy when you're on the airplane and you're told to put your own oxygen mask on first before so you can help your child or who's not, someone who's in your care. It's kind of like that for us. We've got to take care of our own mental health before we can begin to come alongside our teens and be there for what they need. So thank you for all that really valuable, heartfelt, and real important sharing. And I did pop in a link in the chat a little bit ago from a very recent news story. I just grabbed the first one that came up in my stream from NPR, but every major news outlet, I think, covered this a week or so ago about the really strong concern about children's mental health as a huge impact. And I think you're so correct when you're saying that we haven't already begun to see some of the ramifications and have them unfold. I was in the tween session before this, and one of the first slides talked about how important at that age, which is kind of around 7 to 15, socialization is like the key developmental piece for them. And we know that socialization was not typically happening in the last 2 years, and it's still struggling. So how is that going to long-term affect the social emotional growth of our kids? So it's a huge thing. We're not going to solve everything today, obviously, but it's great to come together and think about what we can do and what we can be aware of to support our teens and help our other teen service staff and colleagues as we continue to navigate through these times. So I'm going to open it up and see if there's any other questions. I've been trying to watch the chat and I haven't seen too many pointed questions. I think you're all just ruminating, and I don't want us to feel helpless coming out of here. I want us to come out of here feeling like we do have some things that we can be aware of, that we can try or be sensitive to. So I'm going to stop talking and listen to my ropes agreements and pass over to whoever else might have something to share or ask a question of our panelists. Britt, did you want to get us going?
Right. So I really think, like you're saying, just give the positive spin on this. Like Kate was saying, being constantly aware of the person in front of you as a person that may be going through things. And like Laura was saying, understanding what trauma looks like and how that manifests really just helps us be able to empathize better with our teens. And even though you don't have to know all of these things off the top of your head, you don't have to have the answers, you cannot fix someone else's mental health crisis. Just being aware that this is likely something that will affect the teens in your life at some point, and knowing just the resources to give to them for when they're ready to get help is all that we really can ask of ourselves to do, to be understanding, to, like we do as professional like librarians every day, just have the resource. You don't have to have the answer, you just have to know where to point them.
And also to, want to put a positive spin on it as well. Humans are as complicated as they can be. They seem very resilient, and we've been through what? Mad cow, bird flu, Ebola, 2012, Y2K, and we find a way to get through it, and those resources are helpful, and we'll find a way to get through this too.
And I would like to add that when dealing with reciprocal mentorship, that is so wonderful because it builds relationships and it gives us an opportunity to be active listeners. So there are 3 questions that we ask when we are the mentor. The first question is, what happened? Giving people an opportunity to tell their story is so important, and giving them the space and the safety to do so. The second question is, what was the hardest part what you told? What was the hardest part? So they can understand, well, because sometimes it's so big telling it, and they may have to tell it in more than one session. And then the third question is, how did that make you feel? That's getting to the core of the emotion, and that's when we can start to unpackage and unwrap. But as Kate so eloquently said, or perhaps it was Britt, or it was both of them, we're not there to solve the problem, but being that listening ear, because it's so important to be heard and to be valued. And when we're listening, we don't judge, we don't correct, we watch our facial expressions. So sometimes we have to prepare ourselves to be that active listener because we want that space to be like a sanctuary. And then the roles reverse when we're the vulnerable person. So that is so key. And that builds strong relationships. And as was stated by my co-host, the relationships are so important, especially to young people.
So to that point, I'm thinking about what one of you said about hosting programming that is very directly pointed, that it's definitively labeled as like pandemic recovery, or trying to seek out responses and needs from the pandemic. And I don't know whether that's something, I wasn't able to go to the rebuilding programs and services, but I'm just curious from the 3 of you and all of you also here, as we think about our programs and how to meet these needs of our teens? Do we want to, what do we call them? Do we distinctly say what this is, or do we do subtler kind of programming that allows them to express themselves without, calling it COVID type programming? And I don't know. Learning with all of you, and what is the best way? Is it better to be direct and let the kids know exactly? So as you described, Laura, they get a chance to say what happened to them and what was the hardest part and how they're feeling, or do we do a little bit of both? I don't know. So I'm just thinking about that.
I know one of our sister library systems would do, this is pre-COVID, would do around exam times, de-stress activities. And I think that was always a really safe way to frame things, because we're not going to ask necessarily what's stressing you out at this event, but it is a safe place to come, no, regardless. Maybe you're stressed about exams, maybe you're stressed because something's going on at home, maybe you just lost someone important to you, whatever the reason, we're not going to ask. We're just all here for the same reason, which is just to calm down and have fun. And I really liked the way that they would frame those.
I saw it pop up in the chat box, kind of got cut off, but somebody was saying that programming, even virtually, is a new way to bring back interactions between teens and their peers. And especially as we go back into live programming, as it will eventually start to come back, not only is it a way to get teens reconnected and start getting rid of some social anxieties that may be there, but I think it's very important for teens, and of course I'm saying this as a 27-year-old woman, but to connect to people of their own age and of their own experiences. Because we as adults, look, we still suffer from social media problems that kids have, but we are also in a different way of life as an adult once you get past a certain age. So knowing that there are people around them that are going through the same thing, that are their age, that they can relate to, I think is really important.
I really echo Kate, and I think we take baby steps, because I agree with Carrie. If you say what it's really about, the kids are going to think, that's not my problem. That's not me. No. But creating that space and having programming on a regular, continuous basis, like it's once a month on Tuesday, whatever works best for your program. So it's consistent, because consistency and a routine help settle people down. And over time, those relationships can build. So when I have the book club, I'll introduce a topic, we'll be talking, and I'll say, okay, talk with your elbow partner. And the number of conversations that are created from small group, and then we come back together in a big group and share out. But you're right, the kids want to be together, and they've been sitting all day listening to old fogies or mature, beautiful people. They need time to, have that space to talk with each other. And believe it or not, once that happens on a consistent basis and that trust is built, they'll start opening up to us. They'll open up to each other faster than they'll open up to us. But it's baby steps. It was hard pre-pandemic, and now it's going to take a little bit more of TLC, tender loving care.
Thanks, Laura. Very true. Let's see, Kevin, I think your hand is up.
So our library system is just now kind of doing indoor programming. But outside of the library system, I run a teen group. Oh no, make it go down. There you go. A teen group for PFLAG, parents of lesbian, gay, and transgender children. And I run the group that talks to the teens, which pre-COVID was primarily about coming out, hormone blockers, bullying, stuff like that. But I think regardless if we name it, COVID trauma or pandemic trauma or whatever, it goes back to it, because every session has turned into something that pigeonholes or like talks about COVID. So virtual school or being isolated or not seeing their friends. So every session, the biggest thing I found is that they all try and minimize what's going on as like, it doesn't matter. It's, it's just a bad day at school. And I think my biggest job has just been like, nope, that matters to me. That matters to you. Like, you're allowed to feel like this is an awful thing. You're allowed to. And connecting it to like, we have some teens, we have a 11-year-old who is now going through this and stuff, but has no real sense of what like middle school has ever been like. And the middle school they're used to is not what they are. And the peers giving them context that like, no, this is actually kind of terrible. Like, this isn't what you're used to. And this is what it's going to be like. So even if we don't label it pandemic healing or anything, it's all going to come back to it somehow.
And there are also subtler ways that we've advertised programs, or usually like suicide hotline or assault hotline numbers, they get put in the bathroom. So there is a way to more subtly say, hey, if you want to talk to someone, we have a free counselor available, and you just take this number, and then you don't have to point it out to everybody. So there are more subtler ways to go about some of those harder programs. At the very least, at PD Brown, we have an assault line in the bathroom, and I think of the suicide hotline too is in there.
Any other questions or thoughts, observations as you've been re-engaging with teens? Noticed Kathleen's added in the chat that some of the programming that didn't seem, so serious or meaningful was actually serving an amazing purpose for that socialization and just that release, just having something fun to do. And that was only recognized when it was canceled. And it's so hard to think about that devastating kids to have that other loss. I'm not sure. I haven't gone through the participants to know if there's someone here, if Jay is here. No, Jay can't be here because Jay is actually in the other session right now talking about self-expression. But Jay Travato from Washington County, or if there's anybody else here from Washington County, Ann Schilling was a colleague of Jay's, and she's gone into the schools there as a school media specialist. But I think about the program that they hosted in Washington with their teens with teen grief. And it actually stemmed out of a couple tragic deaths pre-COVID that happened to teens in their community. And they worked with the hospice there in Washington County to provide an atmosphere for teens to come together and just grieve and talk and share their stories. But it evolved through COVID to really encompass a lot of different kinds of loss. It could be physical loss if someone has lost a family member to the disease. It could be the loss of prom and activities that were taken away when schools closed so abruptly in the spring of 2020. It could be just a variety of things, but it was a chance for them to come together and go through some activities and some exercises as a group, just to kind of work through the feelings that they were having. And I can see so much value. That's a kind of another way that the kids can work through what they're feeling at whatever level of grief it might be, without having to be real overt and define it, but it can serve a healing purpose for them.
That's a good point. I'm sorry if I just interrupted someone.
No, go ahead.
Okay. That brings up a good point about how many things were canceled, and that does still affect people. I had a friend who it was 2020 was her last year in college, and it's like, I've done all this work, and what is it? Oh, here's my name scrolling across the screen. Woo. And that's a real concern. And it's easy for people to say, oh, well, people have lost family members, shouldn't be upset about that. Get over it. It's prom, who cares? But that is a real concern. And some people get upset about things that they're missing out on. It's not just all about death and that kind of grief. There's, as Laura was saying, there's many forms of trauma, and it's not for us to say, well, you should get over that. It's about giving that space to let people open up for anything, because grief affects everyone in different ways. And even if we don't think it's a problem, it can be for some people.
Well, I had the great privilege of being one of the chaperones for homecoming. As Kate was sharing, those are normal high school activities for students who want to be a part. Usually our homecoming, we have 500 kids. This year it was over 1,100 students who came. That's literally half our student population. And so they had many activities. They had the dance. I was over board games. They had different activities because they had so many kids. But I don't think they had enough chaperones because we weren't anticipating that many students. But one of the things that happened is our rival school showed up and we started having some issues. So so there's a lot of aggression there. And the week that followed, we had to have a police presence on campus to keep the students apart from different schools. And I don't think the kids hate each other or anything. I just think that's that built up, COVID energy is like, and the kids, we had a great, homecoming but we didn't have it, I've been here for years. So it was, even though it was huge, it was scaled back because we just couldn't do what we've done in previous years. So there's a lot of pent up energy. I'll use that word because it's very neutral and has a positive spin on it. But now things have calmed down a little bit. And but I do agree with Kate. There's all kinds of losses, and we've lost a couple of staff members and a number of our parents. So our school was hit pretty hard. So we're trying to. I think the kids aren't willing to talk about it because it's just too painful. And there's been so many changes. They want to look forward, but little things like homecoming can trigger those things, but we're hanging tough.
Anyone else? I'm trying to kind of keep up. I am thinking about Britt comment about teens and marginalized communities, and I'm thinking about them. I know we have seen where the virtual programming has met the needs of some teens. We've been able to reach them. But again, that's only for the teens that have that available to them, and thinking about those that aren't able to sit with the laptop on their lap and have the connection, and how we're meeting what they're just meeting their needs as well when we can't reach them through the virtual platform. Yeah, it's hard on those who don't have access. Yeah. That's the understatement of the last year and a half.
Hotspots are working overtime.
Yeah. But as I mentioned, I will say that when I was in the schools and I was teaching a research class, some of it was I was using an online learning system, and there was a discussion forum where they had to post and talk, and they had to respond to each other. And I was blown away by some of the involved responses and conversation that came from, and these were 6th and 7th graders, that came from them, that they never opened their mouth in class, but they were so verbal and articulate through the online conversation because it felt safer for them. So I learned a lot from that, just knowing that sometimes that's a platform that they're more comfortable in self-expression than when they're sitting right next to someone that they're not comfortable with in talking. So we have a few more minutes. Any other thoughts as we try to think? And we haven't really talked about partnerships at all. I know that was a whole nother session, this morning, but as we try to address the needs and anticipate, the mental health and the emotions, I mentioned the hospice that Washington County Free Library worked with for their grief program, but just thinking of others maybe in the community, because we are not all healthcare experts, we're not mental health experts. Who else can we maybe reach out to in our communities to help us in this work with our teens? Is something to think about. Tyler.
Yeah, even before the pandemic, we had in our tab, our teen advisory board meetings, we would bring in speakers, and one of them that we always brought in regularly was a woman who was a therapist and who worked with teens specifically, and she worked for the county, and she would come in and do these free kind of like, I don't want to call them sessions for the teens, but she would come in and address the group of them and kind of do her best to normalize that it's okay to be stressed, it's okay to feel anxiety, and we tried to bring her in right in usually in November, because that's when like all the holiday stress starts, and then towards the end of the year when test anxiety and like like things are ramping up for the end of the semester for them, or the end of their school year. And I was always surprised by not only the amount of teams that opened up, and once one person said something, it had a real like snowball effect. So sometimes I would even ask my tab exec board if they felt comfortable, trying to share. So that, because once one person opened up, then there was a snowball effect of other kids, sharing and opening up. And I think all we can do is like many of the people on the panel said, and thank you so much for sharing your stories. That's so brave of you. We really appreciate it. Is to evoke that space for them to have it. And someone in the chat talked about like having bookmark. I think if we have stuff out everywhere for them to see, that helps normalize it too, right? Everyone needs help. Here's the help you can get. You don't have to ask us for it. You can just take a snapshot of this poster, or you can take a bookmark and leave with it. And I think those kind of things that are silent but very present is important to teens' mental health.
One thing I'll say about teenagers is that just be your authentic self. They can smell a fake from a mile away. They know when you're not being yourself. Just be you. You don't have to be cool, because I'm not cool. I have bad hair days. I have times when my nails don't work out. I mean, I make mistakes. I say I'm sorry. I don't, as everyone's saying, I'm not perfect, but you have to be yourself and be who you are. Don't be who they think, don't be who they think you should be. Be yourself. And if you're being yourself, trying to meet your needs, they'll see that. They may not respond to it immediately, but you have to be true to yourself, because you're the only you out there, and what you bring to the table is invaluable. You may not think so. So if you don't, I'm here to tell you today it is. Okay.
Maybe to piggyback on that, that reminded me of the teens that I have that come in all the time and they never speak to you, or hardly ever. And like I have this sort of like system, because I'm there every day. I'm fortunate to be full-time. So I'm there almost every day. I let them get away with it 4 or 5 times, and then I wave at them as they walk by the desk. And then the next time or two, I'll say hi. And then about like the 3rd week of seeing them over and over and over again, I'll be like, hey, what brings you to we're so happy that you're in the library so much. And I basically, this sounds terrible. It sounds like I'm grooming them, but I suppose slowly indoctrinate them into believing that this is a safe space. You know what I mean? And then that they can be, like comfortable there, and that we're happy to have them there. But that basically I sort of slowly, make myself available to them so that they feel like the library sort of belongs to them to some extent. And I think that's important too, because I think a lot of our teens that struggle, and the ones that I've come across, are ones who never will say that they are, right? Who never indicate to you that they're having a struggle. And sometimes, and I have had lots of teens come up to me later, like much, much later, after they've gone through whatever they've gone through, and said, like being able to be here every day, knowing that there were snacks here and there were people here to talk to every single day, really made a difference. And so sometimes just doing your job, being there and being present is enough.
We talk about that a lot in teen services, just being that third space, that safe space, and maybe not doing anything that's majorly exciting, but just being that smile in the afternoon, and that familiar face that they can count on. It's not anything spectacular, but it could be huge right now for them. And we don't realize the impact that just those kinds of simple positive presence, and our simple interactions with them can make. I really do feel badly that this session was running parallel to the self-expression and the activism session. We should have done a better job in balancing out topics, but we loved them all. So it was just, the way it happened. But something else to think about with mental health, and we touched on this in the tween one actually, is just having journals or having coloring sheets or fidgets or things out where they can express themselves in whatever that is. Puzzles, like jigsaw puzzles, and just other ways that they can either draw or doodle or, yes, window markers, just anything like that, that can help be a stress release. Kate.
When I was in college, I took a psychology class, and as we approached finals, one of her assignments for us was for a week. She wanted us to go home and write down 3 things that we were thankful for today, and it could be anything. And it was actually a really nice assignment, and it made me stop and think, okay, no, there's actually some good things going on today. I'm all right today. Because when you're in that low headspace, your mind likes to tell you, oh, everything's garbage, nothing is going right. And we remember that we do actually have good things in our lives. And I'd like to kind of bring that to the library. And we're talking about having sheets or puzzles out, and just, a little printout that says, hey, what are my 3 things I'm thankful for today, a little journal page that they can fill out or take home with them. Because it is nice to think about that when your mind is just a tornado of I'm garbage.
Okay.
It makes me think, Britt, that makes me think of the board. When I was at Calvert and Tiff took me around, there's the board there where the kids can just put up whatever they're thinking about, just a feedback kind of talk back board. And your first thought would be like, uh-oh, what might be on there? But it was positive, and it was just like giving positive support to each other if they knew they had a test. It was a mishmash of a lot, but it was all positive. And I can just think that could be really beneficial too, just to have a spontaneous place right there for them to slap on a sticky or do a drawing or whatever it is.
And that coincides what we're doing in the school systems, because now we have social emotional learning, and we're teaching or giving students experience in mindfulness, and gratitude was one of the exercises. So Kate, once again, you knocked it out the park. And so those are the things that we're doing along with common sense media, making sure it's safe while using online tools. So we're running a parallel as far as our schools and our public libraries, which makes a great natural partnership.
Definitely.
So I wanted to add as well my 2 cents for this. I love what Kevin said in chat about, even with staff starting meetings saying, list one thing that brought them joy today, because if you start on a positive note, it's harder to then spiral afterwards. And even if you don't have something that brought you joy today, what's one thing you're looking forward to? It could be next week, it can be next month. Just list one thing and start there. Always start there.
So true. Yeah. All right. Bill's given us the 5-minute warning. This is another one of our type. We are really milking every minute out of this day with Teen Reconnect. So we're going to move from here. Few minutes to get whatever break you need in between, stretch, and then we'll come back together at 3:10. Any other last thoughts before we wrap up here? I might let us all go a couple minutes early in true teacher fashion, saying that. Thank you all so much for being here. Laura, Britt, Kate, any last thoughts?
I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity. It's always so good to be together with fellow colleagues who have a common purpose and a common passion, and that we're never alone.
So true. And we loved having you be a part of this event. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much for attending and sharing your ideas with us.
All right, everyone. Thank you. We will see you in a few minutes, I hope, for the wrap up.
Make sure you filled out the CEU Google form. I put it in a bunch of times, but I just put it in
Yep.
again last.
Yep. Never